This episode of Trials and Trebuchets is brought to you by Fanroll Dice. If you're in the market for some new, top-notch dice, and who am I kidding, folks? We're all always on the prowl for some shiny rocks, then look no further than fanrolldice.com. Whether it's their bewitching liquid cores, a pack of trusty misfit medals, or even a set of oh-so-endearing miniature dice, you'll find anything you're looking for and more at fanrolldice.com. And don't forget to use our code TRIALS10 at checkout for 10% off your order of new little crit machines.
Welcome to Conversations and Catapults, the #1 after show for the #1 D&D podcast. I'm your host, Nathan, and today I am joined by 4 totally harmless royal advisors. You know, super chill masters of secrets, one and all.
I have many secrets, and all of them I whisper to the royals when they're having important meetings, and I tell them to execute the people I don't like. Hi, my name is Ben.
Hello, I'm an advisor, and my advice for you is to stop listening to this right now. I'm kidding. Hi, it's me, Carla, from the show Trials and Trebuchets. I play Integrity. She's a cutie.
Listen, I know that, a lot of advisors have a reputation for being, spooky and untrustworthy, but I just want you to know that I'm not like that, and you can trust me, and you should definitely kill that guy and do a coup. My name is Sarah, and I play Mira on the hit podcast Trials and Trebuchets.
I'm not like other advisors.
Hi, I'm Sam, and I'm one of those shadowy advisors that just kind of mumbles into the person's ear. No one knows what they say except for the royalty.
That's gonna make recording this episode very difficult.
It's just a circle of whispering. Nothing gets said.
Just quiet mumbling. It's like when background people say mouth the word watermelon to look like they're talking in when doing plays and stuff, so that they're not just standing there.
Speaking of background characters talking, Philip has returned.
He is returned.
Yes, the boy.
He's returned, and he's totally normal and totally on the up and up.
Nothing's wrong with him. Just good old
Doesn't
Philip.
feel like a robot at all.
Not at all.
You know, that's probably the least sinister thing about his return, right? We already knew that he was becoming, a golem boy.
Yeah.
Now he's a golden man.
Yeah, sure, he sure is. But I wanted to check in with Sam right here at the start. I was curious about Serenep's mindset in that opening interaction with Philip. Because she, for a variety of good reasons, didn't make recovering him a priority, or it didn't make sense to risk herself in order to get Philip to Wildcliff or anything like that. So I was curious, what was Serenep's demeanor, what was her thought process like, seeing this person who she didn't necessarily abandon, but she definitely didn't recover?
Yeah, the last time Serenep saw, quote-unquote, Philip was when she was scrying him and saw him, in the boat traveling. And she just kind of took that as, oh, thank goodness he got away. He's going somewhere safe. And then to have him just kind of reappear at the school kind of brought in the thought of either something good happened or something horrible has happened. And the way he was acting was just, it brought a lot of edge to it.
I mean, yeah, but also, that's a very interesting, outlook of, oh, I don't know how he got out of this, but hey, he's alive, so that must mean that everything is okay. Is that, speaking to Serenep's own, sheltered perspective of the world? Or is that more of just, you being, on a meta level, all right, well, Luke isn't going to do anything to my boy. This is my boy. He was created to be, my little boy.
No, Luke would absolutely destroy my boy, and I know that for a fact, and I wait for the day that it's going to happen and destroy my soul. But I think in this, it's definitely, because Serenep was in at the castle, she had Lord Peters to get her out of there. She already had the note from Phillips, I believe it was his mother, saying, hey, we're getting set up be ready. And she kind of took that and that him being on that boat as, okay, so their plans has succeeded, and just kind of, I guess maybe couldn't deal with the idea that he had been caught, and just kind of willful ignorance of, he got out, he's safe, let's wait until everything else is calmed down and we fix everything else, and I'm going to go find him. And then he, came back and he was different.
And this is a question for the whole group. Like, Serenep is the only one with like actual closeness to Philip. So how is it like seeing someone who is like not your friend, but like the friend of a friend come back and act totally wooden this entire time? Like, I especially am interested in Ben like Winsler's perspective as head golem expert. All right, we're getting to see how getting that polysterium liquid all over this little boy, what happens? I don't know. Is it curiosity? Is it dread? Like, what is the vibe here?
I think it might be like a mixture of the two, because Winsler's obviously worried about Philip having been exposed to the polysterium goo, liquid, whatever you want to call it, and coming back and seeing them like this, it definitely feels like that seed of worry has sprouted into like a little plant that now has to be looked at and possibly taken care of at some point. Otherwise, some terrible things could happen to Philip, and I think Winsler probably doesn't want to see the friend of a close friend end up being lost because of their mistake, I guess.
What is that worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario is the affliction that's affecting Philip progresses to the point where Philip is not able to be saved and their life gets cut short pretty quickly compared to what it...
Oh, so you think this goo is like a life-threatening thing? And
it could very well be a life-threatening thing, also because of how the conversation with Ari went. And there was that whole conversation where, has this happened before? And they basically said that I think it happened maybe like one other time, and then is there a way to save them? And it was like, no, they kind of died from it, and it's kind of worrisome. It's scary, and it's also kind of curious because like this is only the second time this has ever happened. Can I use the knowledge that I have at my disposal and everyone else's assistance to possibly prevent this from happening so that a tragedy can be avoided?
Integrity? Tell me what you're like. Jeez Louise, I just got Carla integrity. The fourth wall is just totally gone in my brain. But no, I was curious to take a quick, unless anyone else has something to say on Philip right now, I did want to move and talk about the swim team very briefly.
Which one?
Hey. Meeting another warlock, Bowen Blueblight. I wanted to see, this is the first time Integrity has come across a warlock who is not kind of at odds with their patron, or not like seemingly being taken advantage of. And of course, that is like, you have to consider the source, right? I wanted to check in and see, like, does this alter Integrity's view of the warlock patron relationship? Or does she just think like, oh, Bowen is being had here. Bowen is like getting duped by their patron.
I don't necessarily think that Integrity has a pessimistic view in that sense. Like, maybe she feels that at this point the relationship is not, not too far gone. Right now it's beneficial for the both of them that there is no risk to life. But based on pattern with like what's in the Book of Warlocks, things can sour really quickly once, like, let's say that BB wants to break the pact or go against the wishes of their patron. But she totally understands that at some point there is a benefit to having this relationship. So maybe at this point they don't have that yet. And I think for her, it's just preventing the worst case scenario that could happen and just like guiding a co-warlock. Not that she's doing a wonderful job with her own relationship with her
No, I don't
patron,
think so.
But
I was literally about to say, like, does she feel like she is kind of in an awkward position of like trying to offer people guidance while being similarly lost herself?
Oh, for sure. It is weird to do it, but it's the kind of thing that I know some of the mistakes that I made, and I have this experience. Maybe it can help you not do or not make the same mistake. Or she can also learn, or she can learn from BB, and maybe there is a possibility for a good relationship. And how can that be? I do like the power that it gives. This might not be like just like integrity speaking, but in terms of like as a player, there are benefits to like having certain abilities with the relationship between the progenitor and integrity. So it's not fully negative, but my brain really went blank there. I'm sorry. I'm coming off from like a long stretch.
You're all good. I just was curious of like, what mistakes do you think integrity thinks of as like, oh, if I can prevent someone else from making these? Because I have difficulty thinking of like, outside of just signing up with the progenitor, like that's the like the mistake. But if someone already has a patron, they can't, stop themselves from making that mistake, right?
Yes.
Are there any others that she considers like big flashpoints?
I think that past integrity may have not been so smart, like with being, she could have been more stealthy with what things she has planned against the progenitor. I feel like the progenitor has read into her mind a little bit more. She's very outright, or tried to be outright about the progenitor being a bad guy. So like I feel like integrity could be a little more through like how she plans on kicking the progenitor's ass, and not just showing her cards all the time kind of vibe. That's pretty much it.
I mean, speaking of that kind of like wanting to have a subtle relationship between someone who is like granting you a degree of power while you are actively like either disobeying or working against them, Sarah, we had a great Mira Marchand moment of getting word from Alla Algrim like, hey, don't tell anyone, but this is going down. And then you're immediately like, all right, well, I'm going to tell the people who need to know right now. Like, we're figuring this out. Like, I wanted to check and see, like, Mira has had a huge growth in terms of just, like, being more sure of herself and being, like, just knowing that, oh, if I am a powerful piece on the board, then I'm going to make my own moves here. So I was curious, like, is there any fear of retribution from Alla Algrim? Or do you think that you've pulled this off well enough that you don't have to worry about any sort of, like, punishment for disobedience?
Mira isn't worried. Like, this sounds a little bit cynical, but I feel like for Mira, either way, she can sort of spin this to benefit herself, because either, like, the Philip, oh, let's go Sereneth was part of the capture plan from the start, in which case there's no indication that, like, Mira has alerted anyone or done anything wrong because the plan went off as a hitch. And if Philip is genuinely a beneficial person who is coming to rescue Sereneth, then Mira can be like, yeah, I didn't tell her anything. Like, Philip, I'm not responsible for Philip. So I think that in her mind, this has been a great success for her. And we'll see if that actually ends up being the case. But
yeah,
I do think I have really been enjoying Mira not necessarily second guessing her decisions as much. I think that Horst vision of like, oh, here's this bad thing you did, and having Mira say, no, actually, like, I'm fine. I'm doing my best here. I am helping people, has been a great moment for her. But yeah, we'll see if it pays off.
Fingers crossed. I was a big fan of that moment, but also it makes me so, like, the whole pride cometh before the fall, right?
Well, it is Pride Month, so I think Mira will be
fine. Yeah, happy Pride Month, everyone.
Happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride.
I love the idea of Mira wanting to find a way, or having multiple ways of spinning this, but they still involve kind of lying about her active involvement, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's the game plan if, like, Alla Algrim drops a, Mira's favorite spell, Detect Thoughts, and is just like, hey, so did you tell Sereneth Cinderman?
Oh, shit.
Like, what is the recourse?
I think that Mira is confident-ish in her ability to, like, talk her way out of such a situation. Like, listen, it's not that Alla is especially concerned for Alla's sake that, like, Sereneth knows. It's, like, how this will reflect on, like, the Elven Kingdom and all of that. I think Mira could very quickly be like, okay, yes, I did, and here's how I'm gonna help you put a great spin on things.
Jesus Christ. I love this used car salesman version of Mira. Yeah, listen, it's a great deal that I've made for it.
fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Here's how my decision will retroactively aid you in ways you never could have
true.
imagined.
This is actually great. I did it for you. I did it to help you.
I've expanded your spy network. Now you also have my classmates.
you go.
Congratulations.
Wow.
Oh, but I mean, given how your ruse went off with the feigned death, with everything going on with Philip taking Serenep, I mean, I'll just ask, do we trust Philip here?
No, I do not.
No.
I, Sarah, do not. But that also might be wishful thinking, because I, Sarah, think it's more fun if Philip cannot be trusted, so I don't know how much of that is my hope as opposed to my belief.
I think the fact that Philip was like, Sereneth, if you've ever loved me, you will come with me.
Right?
Was a moment of me,
Laying it on a
Sam
bit thick,
going,
dude.
oh, this is going to go horribly wrong. And Sereneth going, shit, okay.
Yeah, I didn't trust Philip one bit that entire time. Like, in the moment, I was like, okay, this is weird. And then after we recorded that, I'm like, fuck, this is actually not good at all. This is really bad that we let this happen.
I think besides the golem stuff, something seriously strange has happened to Philip from the last time we saw him. Because the whole can't has no thoughts anymore. Can't talk about, can answer certain questions, that kind of stuff. Something has happened. So even if he speaks this is true and I believe it is true, could all just be a weird fabrication. Maybe that's not even Philip. Maybe it's a weird little
Could
robot.
be that he's under a high-level spell that is making him act this way, too.
Yeah.
Very good. Who knows?
I would like to believe that Philip's love for Serenep. It's the hopeless romantic in me.
We're gonna have a moment of the power of love.
The love between Philip towards Serenep reigns true, but I agree with the fact that we don't know who's in control of how Philip thinks.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if the golems are hive mind.
I don't think they are.
No.
No, each and every single one of them are individual.
The Crowlims, maybe. Maybe those ones are a hive mind, but the old golems, like Tolinari and Stowe and all
Yeah.
them, they're autonomous, I think.
Yeah.
Do we think that the crow golems are have also been to the under campus with the water that Philip was accidentally dipped in?
I don't think they've ever been further down than the swimming pool,
I don't
honestly.
think Crow even knows anything about that. I'm gonna be honest. I don't think
No.
he knows about that.
No, nobody really knows about the Polishirium that much.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then
Listen,
Philip's perfectly
there are so
fine.
many secrets under this fucking school.
There are so many. There's an alternate dimension. There's the weird friggin' oil thing. There's so much.
Yeah.
Well, it's actually great that, every single, evil, scary thing in this podcast is just under the same school, because villains who want to take advantage of it, hit the first thing, they're like, yay, we solved all the mysteries, and then they don't discover the rest because they think they got it. Oh my god, there's a Polishirium, we did it, we cracked Wildcliff.
Going back to the Philip thing,
Yeah.
just building off of what Carla said about the hopeless romantic, you hope that his love is strong for Serenep, that you think that there is some good in him left. I think that while Philip is definitely true to Serenep and does love Serenep, I think he is still being used in a way that's manipulating him so that he's being forced to do this, and his love is making it sound more genuine and believable, I think.
And I think the worst part of that is that even though there is this initial distrust of it, is that Serenep loves Philip, and so he could if she is not okay with something, he can probably I don't know, whatever this weird pirate situation is, it's oh, this is bad, and he's gonna be oh no, but here's the reason why it's actually good, and here was the plan the entire time. Then she's gonna be okay, I trust you in this, because she still does love him. It's just now it's gonna probably be used against her.
Yeah, love can be blinding.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wholly possible that Philip believes that this is the right thing to do. Maybe, saving Serenep is bringing her forward in a different manner so that the punishment will be less. You know, like it can be twisted in so many
Maybe.
different ways on what a person thinks is the right thing.
Yeah.
I had the exact same thought, Carla, because also Philip has had a habit of ignoring, like, consulting with Serenepth before taking big actions.
Yeah.
Like, the
True.
duel with Fred was, like, dropped on Serenepth. Like, you know, he had the crossbows ready when she was like, no, let me talk to Fred. I can work this out. Please, God, please. And it's like, no, we're doing this. And he did that. He was acting unilaterally for what he perceived as both of their benefit, and it would not be surprising to see him doing so again.
Yeah.
But I had a bit of a broader question just about, like, playing D&D, and I especially wanted Sarah and Sam to weigh in on this, just in terms of, like, having player characters who have either a significant other or a love interest. And I love seeing the different, like, stages that we are at with both of those relationships. And I was curious if, like, seeing the other players' interactions with their significant other NPCs, if that would influence your own play, or if, like, you're trying to make your relationship, you know, mirror it with Delnus, distinct from Philodeneth and whatnot. That was a very rambly question on my end, so feel free to take your time thinking. And also, like, for Carla and Ben, you two, like, have had brief, like, forgive the pun, like, flirtations with a long-term, like, romance, or, like, romance for your player character. But you have, like, seemed to stay, like, out of that. You know, are you just afraid of it being, like, oops, all couples, or...
Oops.
You know, I'm curious to hear the different mindsets that each of you have approaching what can be a very touchy dynamic at any D&D table.
I'm not averse to having a romantic relationship between a player character and an NPC. I've had a character who had exactly that in a previous campaign, and although it was never really fully realized, something was there. I do think that it might be a mix of sort of the type of character that I'm playing and my own personal sort of opinions on relationships in general. Sort of like Winsler is somebody that I probably wouldn't expect to end up having like a fully fledged relationship with another NPC. Like there was that whole thing with Charlotte, you know? I think that was really cute. I think that was really nice to give him. But I don't think it's something that I would prefer to really go super deep into, probably. Because I don't think that is exactly what Winsler is there at Wildcliff to particularly do. He's more about helping his friends the best that he can, and more finding solutions to strange magical phenomenon that anyone else may not seem to have an answer to. I feel like that's just more of his style and speed, and maybe it's just me, but I don't think I would probably want to go any deeper than what I have already with the whole Winsler Charlotte thing, or with Winsler Kurt, really.
Hell yeah! Thank you for shouting it out.
I have to, like, I have to say that too, because that is there too.
Hell yeah!
Integrity's too selfish to be in a relationship. All she think,
Oh, that is such an integrity thing.
like,
Oh my god.
like when Windsor said, "Oh, the type of character," I started thinking about Integrity as a person and reflecting on who she is, and she's too self-absorbed to actually fall in love with anyone else. And as we all know, if you're listening to this, Integrity has tried to dabble in things such as Dean, dabble in things. But yeah, it's just like not her personality. It started out as me, like, as a player and not as like Integrity, being uncomfortable with like flirting with a DM.
That's
Which
very
is so funny considering.
Yeah.
It's very funny given the circumstances here.
I mean, to be fair, I don't think I've ever seen Carla and Luke. Like, I've hung out with them in person multiple times now. Like, I've been on multiple calls with them. I don't think I've ever seen the two of you flirt either, so that makes sense that you would still be uncomfortable with it.
But now that's not the case. Like, I don't think that that's the reason. It definitely is not the reason. Integrity has just formed into this character who is too focused on her own and her goals. I don't think she even quite knows what her like end goal is. She just knows that she wants everything all at once. So to add a relationship to that I feel like will steer her away from her unknown goals. Thank you.
And they get like an interview question, like,
She's just a career-driven woman. Like, hell yeah, we
good
love to
for
see it.
her.
Oh yeah.
Good for her. Now on the opposite end, like,
Yeah.
we've had Delra for ages now.
Yeah.
Like, you've had to keep that spicy.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I was kind of going to talk about, which is that I think both the biggest appeal but also the biggest challenge to like playing romance in a long-term D&D game is like finding ways to keep the relationship interesting, right? Because I feel like oftentimes, and I think this is one of the reasons that, you know, sometimes people shy away from doing like romantic subplots, is that it feels like it is very easy to fall into a trap where either the romanced NPC, like the partner character and the relationship like stagnates, a relationship is treated as the end of the story and not the beginning of it, or they just like don't really show up at all, or when they do, the only way that people can think of to progress a relationship is through like conflict and challenges to the relationship, like fighting. And so all of the scenes end up being conflict based. And so the character doesn't like get a lot of other interesting stuff to do. And so I think like with Delness and also just with D&D romance in general, it's all about looking into like ways to keep Delness, you know, here in the narrative, like doing interesting things and progress the relationship. So for example, you know, Delness being involved in the astral projection plot, I think like can bring up a lot of super interesting angles for, you know, things that we can explore in the relationship, especially now that Delness is at least partly a lich and Mira knows this. I'm very interested in like trying to find ways to keep Delness active in the plot and keep, you know, both Mira and Delness progressing as individuals, but also them as a relationship without either, you know, all conflict all the time, or either of them just stagnating and Delness being like, you know, basically a fashion accessory to Mira in these scenes.
Absolutely. And I think part of that difference, like that degree of like an NPC being a fashion accessory, is because of like a power differential that is very common at a D&D table between a PC and an NPC. And like, I think Luke has done a fairly decent job of like keeping Delness, you know, similar level of like power to the rest of the party. So she is not a drawback by any means, and thus can actually have a more active role in her story.
Yeah, and also feels like a fully realized person as opposed to just like a vessel through which Mira can develop.
Yes, very much so.
Or like someone who only exists for Mira to interact with and doesn't have her own interests and her own stuff going on outside of Mira. So I really appreciate, I don't think that Delra as a storyline would work if Delness was not as like realized and developed as she is.
Very true. Now, Sam, you've heard all of these incredible hot takes about like romance in D&D. I would love to hear like how this experience has been for you, because I think Philip and Serenep have had a very fraught, they've had like lots of dramatic moments throughout, but not as much like consistent time together. So I wanted to hear about like what your thoughts are regarding like you making use of that limited time.
I think that, because I think Ben talked about like one time having in the previous campaign having a character who kind of had more of a relationship going on. I think Serenept is the first character I've played who has had an actual like romantic interest, from what I can remember at the very least. But I think with this whole like, yeah, because like there's definitely been, because like, you know, Philip was kind of in Serenept's backstory like from the kind of the beginning, because I kind of felt like this is going to be a new D&D game with my friends. I do want to try and have a bit of a different character this time. Philip themselves, because we're going on adventures, we're not around him too often. I don't remember exactly when this was, but I remember a long time ago Luke saying something like, because I think something was happening and then Sereneth chose to check on Philip, because I think something dangerous was happening and she was like, I'm gonna go check on Philip. I think Luke said something along the lines of, I think that was the first time I kind of realized that Philip was a character, or like a character to Sereneth, if that makes sense. Because I understand, like, you know, NPCs, like, you can have a story go on, but I think at that point with Sereneth choosing to check on Philip, make sure that he's okay, or again, I don't remember the exact scenario that was happening there, was a moment of like, oh, so this is someone in Sereneth's life, like proper, not to the same level as like Angelica, who also kind of more recently became someone more permanent, that other than oh yeah, we knew each other when we were kids, and then like don't see each other for X amount of time. But I feel like kind of with because it is different than Mira and Delnus, because again, there was already kind of a background written behind it. And because I know with the original question, it was like, has watching the interaction with Mira and Delnus, has that affected how you work with Philip? And I don't think it has. I don't know if it comes off as I'm taking influence from their relationship. I don't know if that has happened. It wasn't intentional if it has happened. But I think it's a different type of romance because they grew up together and Mira and Delnus didn't. Not to say that their love for each other would be different because of that, but just different they just interact with each other differently because they've known each other for so much longer.
I was just going to ask, like, how do you try to convey that history and interactions with Philip? You know, if you two are like childhood friends, like what are some things that you do in order to like make sure that you're conveying that whenever you are like having a scene with just Sereneth and Philip?
I try to have more casual language with Philip. If it's just us there compared to like if we're talking to a professor, my parents, or just any other students outside of the main cast, because that would show there's a familiarity, enough of a familiarity that there isn't really airs put in the way when they're talking to each other proper. That's one of the ways I really, because like again, like we don't have a lot of scenes where it's just Sereneth and Philip in a lot of in any big scenarios, except for like a couple of the more dramatic scenes like you mentioned there earlier. But I think that has been the only way I've really been able to show how well they know each other, with the fact that she can just be herself.
Yeah, I like how subtle that is. Like, it's very, like, low-key, but I like how intentional that choice is. And it's something that I will have to go back and now listen through all of my Philip and Sereneth supercut scenes to, like, check that out.
You've edited it together just for this occasion.
I really appreciate all of these varying views of romance in D&D, and I am so excited to see how they develop further. And I'm very excited to see, you know, are we all just going to place bets on how evil the plan is that Philip has made? Or is it, you know, are we placing bets on whether he's evil at all?
I want to see the good in Philip. I don't want to have him be a bad guy, but if he becomes a bad guy, then so be it.
I don't want to see full bad guy, but like maybe like trying to do good in like a tragic circumstance because
Doing
of that.
good for the wrong,
Yeah, that's
wrong
it.
thing.
See,
Yeah.
I feel like Philip isn't necessarily like evil, because I mean the thing of like, oh yeah, I was like brought before the king and queen. It's like, no, obviously like they did some fucked up magic to him. I assume.
Yep.
The vibe that I get, or at the very least something that I would find interesting, is this idea that Philip still does genuinely care for Sereneth, but that he has been, whether it is like brainwashed via magic or just convinced that like the best way to do that is by turning her in. This idea of like, it's going to be a lot worse if it doesn't happen now. Like, I'm sorry, I know this isn't good, but like, I'm sure they will be understanding. I'm sorry that I had to deceive you. Like, that would be very interesting to me if there is still a hint of that affection that they share for each other, but it has now been turned in a very dangerous direction.
Yeah, it's been twisted by those with
Yeah.
power. Oh,
Yeah.
you love to see power dynamics becoming a theme in this campaign, especially in this arc, I think, with the Warlock discussion, with, you know, how much does Winsler owe to the golems / all of that, like, all of this to say, I'm dying to see, or to hear, the next episode, and I know that you all are dying to record it, so I will go ahead and let you go, but thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Conversations in Catapults.
Thank you
Now
for
I'm
hosting
going to
us.
slide into the DMs. Welcome back to Slide into the DMs. I'm your host, Nathan, and joining me today is a mysterious royal from long ago who has come back into our lives and
Yes.
a little bit different.
You might be able to call me a golem. You might be able to call me an abductor. The words, you know, don't matter.
You
But
know,
I'm Luke. Hi.
oh, yeah. Luke, we are like, I would say what? We're like in the middle of Homecoming, probably towards the tail end. I know you said you wanted it to be a shorter arc, right?
Yes, I was hoping for probably 6 episodes. So yeah.
Yeah, we were right smack dab in the middle. How are you feeling about it so far? Because this is...
yeah.
I'm sorry, the thing that I wanted to say before I let you answer the question that I led with...
Yes.
is
I got too excited.
Yeah, that's on me. I should hold the question until after I make my observation.
Yes.
But no, so like you have spoken to me in the past, or like, and I don't know if it was on air or not, but being worried about Wildcliff arcs being kind of samey because they're all set in the same kind of area.
Yeah.
And with Homecoming, it seems like you are avoiding that by really taking like a lot of vignettes over a longer period of time. And so, like, this allows you to follow up on a lot of things that have been promised previously. Things like, you know, the swim club.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
Philip returning. Like, these things
Philip
that
returning,
have been, like,
the Druid craft
seeded.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, you know what? Tell me first how you're feeling, and then I can ask my actual questions.
Absolutely. I'm glad it's palpable, or I'm glad it's noticeable. It's obviously, that I'm trying to, like, pulling in the vignette section and being like, this is going to be a montage of the next 10 weeks of your lives. It's fun. It lets us cover a lot of ground really quick. This is officially the arc that covers the longest amount of time in the shortest amount of time possible. The antithesis of the Autumn's End saga, which is what I live for, quite frankly. I want to move at a sprinting pace. I want to be going 140 kilometers down the road. I don't want to stop. I don't want to reach sludge. That's my worst fear. But I'm feeling really good about this. I'm glad that, like, the vignetting focus, or the vignetting style, to break up, do the montage, 10 weeks, and this is the things that happen. And here's some scenes of your own asking from the players, and here's some stuff that I need. I am going to use this opportunity to draw this thing to a close, or pick up the fallen threads that I want to deal with before the end. And this is another thing with, like, this arc, Nathan, was I was sitting here and I was like, Homecoming is going to be 2 episodes, and then we're going to do the Karina thing. And that was after recording just the first episode, right? We ended One Hell of a Deal and started Homecoming. So we got the scene with, like, Dessa being like, this is the ground rules. We got the scene with starting the Warbler. We got the scene with Winsler going to get his Druidcraft book. We got the scene with Integrity.
Apprenticeship, yeah.
Yes. And then we got, like, the Serenup thing at the end. I was like, okay, cool. We're going to wrap this up and we're going to finish all the vignettes next episode, which is what we did correctly. But that my conception was that it ends there. We're going to end with the Karina thing, the way that we did, and then we're going to move on to something else. Specifically, we're going to move on to the astral projection arc, which has been looming over us for a while. But devils whispering on my shoulder, I shouldn't say devils, co-writers whispering on my shoulder, although they're not knowingly, they are co-writers.
Shout out to Luca.
Truly earning his writing credit on this arc and every Weenie Hollow. But there was, like, this kind of, like, creeping thought in my head of, I just reintroduced Philip. We're doing some heavy questioning of Osei Crow. We're doing some explorations and like this question of, why is Serenup still have her room? Why has nothing changed for Serenup? Why the wanted posters for Serenup were there? Integrity's family was being questioned about it. The world is moving, and now that Philip's back, what does that mean? And I was sitting there like, I don't think I'd be very satisfied if I moved on. And I also think that if I was ever to get this, you asked me this question a lot back during, like, Autumn's End of, like, why did you choose now for this? And I would always say, because this is the best possible moment for me to get it out and have it be satisfying. And that's what I feel about this, is I had a realization that we can wrap up some Serenep stuff before we go into the very end. Because if we do astral projection and then do whatever follows that, which is probably going to be leading into the end, then I know some people, and by some people, I know Sarah was, like, super bummed as fuck, like, yo, this is gonna be an Isithil arc when the Ira stuff was happening. This is gonna be an Isithil arc? I don't wanna fucking go to Isithil, but was a team player and was still like, oh, Ira, yeah, maybe solve your problem, we'll be there for you. But after the episode, Sarah was like, "Oh, I'm so glad," or like after the recording session, Sarah was like, "I'm so fucking glad we're not going to Isithil." I regret to inform you.
Oh god.
Obviously, there is going to be another Isithil arc. Maybe there isn't gonna be. Maybe it's just gonna happen off screen. But I'd be wildly dissatisfied. Maybe I will have to take it into my own hands if my players mutiny me and just write like a 8-page short story about it. Who the fuck knows? Maybe that's what I'll do when we wrap up all of this. If there's anything that's like unaccounted for, we can all just write short stories. You know, who gives a shit? Not everything needs to be like actual play podcast.
Yeah.
You can take your narrative into multimedia. But like, this is the perfect time to get back to this. This is the perfect time to wrap something up with the character, which is a big deal for their character. Serenep is a noble from the moment we meet her. She's the noble student, right, of the crowd. There was this whole like falling out with the nobility. She's sold her parents' names away now. The unnamed traitors. Philip has returned and he is something else.
He's getting a little silly with it.
He's getting silly with it. He's a little silly man. I don't like that. Philip is a not silly man. Philip has a plan, and Philip's plan went off without a hitch, and for that, I'm on cloud 9.
Yeah, how long has that Philip plan been cooking in the back of your head?
That Philip plan has been cooking in the back of my head since he was abandoned by Serenep in the capital Arrows. So back during like the start of Trading Places, is the moment Serenep was like, I'm a traitor now, let's get out of here, and Philip, like, because I'm even setting the scene for like Philip's treason in that, where he like sets up that, hey, you should get out of here. My mother's getting out of here. My dad's already out of here. I'm going to challenge the prince to a duel. And if I kill him, that probably won't be great. And so I already had this conception of like, oh, if it doesn't go good for him and he lives, this is the route. This is the pathway. His Gollum-y stuff was all already occurring. We can turn that dial up and we can introduce some other confounding elements and turn it into a fun story.
Yeah, Philip is kind of an interesting case for me because like, and this is not meant to be an indictment whatsoever.
Oh, of course not.
But it did seem like for a long time he was either like nothing or like you were throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick, just to give him something.
Yeah.
Because like
100%.
He was given to you as like, you're Serenep's childhood crush.
Yes.
And then you're left with like that information with like very little else. So you've got to find out like what's the hook for Philip? Is it the Golemification?
Golemification? Is it something else? Is
it
the treason? Is it... I think I've said this before. What I did was I fractured Kurt into 2 pieces. Kurt was originally supposed to be not a rags to riches, but a raggedy rich kind of guy, where like he came from like he came from a good pedigree, but had this fascination with artificery and the mundane world. That's why in the early episodes he's like, a farm? Oh my goodness. Because Serenep doesn't exist. Philip doesn't exist. And so when Philip gets introduced, I'm like, oh, Kurt steps on the toes of what Philip's existence ought to be. I'm gonna pull him back and make him a poor boy, so now we have the poor boy dorm team. And it also now makes no fucking sense why Kurt doesn't know what a farm is or some of that shit. Whatever that shit in the early episodes is, brain numb. Even if he was a noble, I hate my writing from the early episodes, but we make our dues. But Kurt and Philip were the same character. I split them into 2, and I was just kind of like, his parents are courtiers, and he's Serenep's childhood crush-ish childhood friend, this anime trope, and he looks like Timothy Chalamet. That's his character. That was his character.
Yep. You got a truth or dare.
Hey guys,
it's like, I love Fantasy Mumford and Sons, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Like, this guy is white
You're
bread.
nothing. You are Wonder Bread. But Golemification started something, and then as my slow machination, there's a very slow machine between my ears, as it were. And that machine takes many, many years for certain things to spool up.
I like
Philip is one
that
of them.
Showing up with Philip here of like being like, oh, you're detecting thoughts. And it almost sounded like you were going to say, it's the dial-up tone. But then you're like, no, it's mental wind.
Mental wind.
Oh, he's having a little brain fart.
That was so fun for me. I love things that I think of, things that I don't really formalize very often. When they come up in play, when Mira detects thoughts, and I'm like, we can talk about this. When there's a couple things. I often repeat certain words because I want to be very deliberate in their usage. For a long time, we can just historically look at like orbs. I would always very specifically be like orbs or hatch. And I had to very cautiously find synonyms for those words to describe the universe, because there's spherical things and trapdoors abound, because I love putting my characters in a vertical cylinder and being like, yeah, there's a ladder, go up the ladder. It's a hat. The cylinders are a theme of the show. Part of its identity.
I don't think you understand what themes are.
You're right. However, there's certain words I love using, and I don't really formalize them. We can sometimes when you play a character, you probably relate to this, Nathan. I don't know if you find this, but characters really love a certain word, or when you're describing a certain character, you can't help but go on that like mental track of like certain ways to describe them. And so that exists here. And for like the word thing, I'm going to point back to the last arc, One Hell of a Deal, where me playing Deanna, for some reason, she just could not stop saying damnable. And I was like, that's not me trying that. That's just when I do this voice and get into this character, I'm saying those things. But with Philip, like, oh, the starlight in his eyes and this shining, fresh-looking guy. And then Amir being like, something's wrong here. Sarah being like, something's up here. I'm going to detect his thoughts. And I get to formalize an informal thought of, like, what his brain is like, both in part to Gollumification, as well as, like, just some other stuff that's going on with him.
I mean, my immediate thought was that, like, it's mind blank, but that's a very high level spell for Philip to have.
That is, yes.
Just, like, always on.
Philip is not a very competent mage. That is very true.
Yeah, he was... Actually, I was going to say something like, oh yeah, he was one of the lowest scorers on the final exams. I don't know. I was just going to lie about him.
He was
his
middle of the ground. Well, he wasn't great. Yeah, I don't think he was actually great. But he's not a proficient mage, so that's a bit out of his skill level, unless he has external help, which, you know, it seems like he does have some external help by the end of the last episode.
Yeah, it's true. Oh, God. I want to circle back to...
Yes.
This is a great way of tying in a lot of Sereneth's story elements to a place where they make the most narrative sense. And this way, we can go ahead and tie those threads up as they were before heading into the end game.
Yes.
For Trials and Trebuchets as the campaign. And so, like...
For Wildcliff as the campaign. That's always
Wildcliff. I don't know why. This just in. The podcast is over. Conversations in Catapults will be taking its place. We will just be doing the shooting the shit show. But truly, though, like, you as a DM, and this is like, you know, me just coming from an outsider's perspective, I don't know how true this is. I know that you're a big, like, Game of Thrones head, or like a Song of Fire and Ice, or Ice and Fire, etc.
Yes.
Like, and so you have a very, like, politically minded idea for, like, the actual noble society. And then you have Sereneth, who wants nothing to do with nobility. And, like, wants to leave it. Like, and I don't mean that in a negative way. Like, that's
pejorative
not an indictment on Sam.
No. It is like a actual assessment of the character of Sereneth's wanting to become more provincial, I think would be the easiest way to put it. And saying I've never hidden my kind of like my love of Dune, which is a fantasy political series. My love of A Song of Ice and Fire, although a bit more...
Less so now.
In my later age, I do reflect a little bit less fondly upon it. But I did enjoy it when I read it. And when I made this campaign setting, it was when I was in the thick of things. When I was literally the guy posting and commenting on r/ASOAF about, like, fucking wild-ass tinfoil theories and just, like, weird shit and analyzing the trees and, like, these... Anyways... Needless to say, I was deep in this, lost in the sauce when I was making the campaign setting. Yes. So, like, the political, one of the first questions in, like, my notebook was, like, what does the Ashuan nobility look like? What's this, like, hierarchy look like? How is the country or the kingdom divided, which is provincially, because I'm Canadian, obviously. So I'm going to use provinces. One of the biggest faults that didn't come up then, Nathan, what I always reflect on, is now I'm pointing, audience, to Nathan, to my map of the world that I drew in a Manic episode last summer and started naming every single town and village that I had ever thought of in the past years of thinking about this. It's hung up on my wall, and I stare at it every single time I walk into and out of my office. Nowadays, I have ideas of other nation states. But when I was starting the game, I had such a peeled back kind of perspective. If I was to ask you, Nathan, what is the nation which Algrim governs? Right?
Elven host.
Yeah, exactly. That doesn't is a readily apparent answer. The answer would be like Ophelion as more of a city-state than anything, but that's elven politics, and we're not here to talk about elven politics today. Maybe that's another day. All did come up in these episodes, and I loved her in them.
Oh,
Because it's the first time we see her like frazzled. The way that she spoke, I just really enjoyed that scene.
it was
But
quite nice to see another side of her.
but I also love a reverse pickpocket. That's some good shit. Nonetheless, I did have a very like strong notion of like what the Ashuan nobility looked like. Courtiers, dukes, duchesses, provinces, holds, how people are divided, where the structure of power is, crimes, major crimes, minor crimes. What is the kind of like, how does the law work in this thing? And that kind of conception, it was a bit more mundane. I don't know if you know this, or it's probably like a little tidbit locked away in like Colosseum of Cuisine, where that is a canonical, like, historical kind of thing of, like, dwarves. So one of my first things with the setting, actually, was thinking about dwarves, because I was playing campaign, and I was playing a dwarf, so I was dwarf-pilled. And so I had this conception of, like, what like, you have this conception of, like, dwarves as, like, really strong-willed, like, little guys who live under the mountains, right? And they all live in their little clans, and they have their little machinations, and little... Like, I just think of dwarves as like little political players, but some of them are like rocks for brains. And so it makes this a very interesting dynamic where the range and skill of the political ability of individual dwarven clans is like very vast, as opposed to if you think of like, if I point to something like A Song of Ice and Fire, where the political skills differ, but everyone has the same tool set and is kind of operating on the same playing field. Some people have a less willing approach, such as like Serenep, I don't think is a very good political player. And I think of Crow as something who has that same toolkit as her, lots of money, lots of affluence, but uses the toolkit much better. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but the disparity between Serenep and Crow is kind of massive, because he's a deliberately affluent figure. But Serenep and another noble of her similar position, Serenep and Karina, very similar standing. I originally conceived of dwarves as having like this very vast difference in like their actual caring about political intrigue and plotting. And I know this is super aside, but no one ever asks me about the politics of the world or laws, so I just got to use this as a chance to stay out of my little crate. But my original conception of the dwarves is a kind of like very disparate in terms of their political leanings and kind of like clan alignments, as it were.
Why? Like, what is the root of that, like, division?
The root of that division comes from me thinking about, like, your traditional, at least the way I traditionally think of dwarves. You think of like, oh, we are the clan that does all the smithing. We are the clan that does all the like, you think of like this is very silly simplified version of like a culture where it does all the archetypal things that you might think of, and it's divided very evenly across clan lines, and this clan's responsible for this and this clan's responsible for that, because dwarfs don't actually exist, and a lot of authors are really lazy about the way that they put them in, and they're just like, oh, this culture is very monotonous and very, it's just one thing. Every dwarf does one thing and nothing else, right? And so thinking along those lines, I was just interested in the idea of like very disparate political players in dwarven clans. But something that came from that was like this really stupid, this is the thing. Sometimes I actually have deep thoughts, and sometimes it's like just a dumb little strand that you pull on and you're like, okay, this is just going to be in. Was that, oh, what if as a way to like curtail these very politically minded dwarves, as a way to prevent them from just running a gambit on everyone else, and very much having like in each Nog, which is the dwarven word for citadel, you might not know, Nog Derheim and Nog Toldir, that's just Citadel Derheim and Citadel Toldir. Their towns, their citadels are named after the architect who makes it. Nonetheless, any clan within those like dwarven cities, if one of them was like super politically minded in this conception of mine, like what is to stop that from being more nefarious, or just them taking advantage of others who aren't? And like that's part of the fun of the like the political intrigue game. But also thinking about dwarves as a race who would worship like gods of order, gods of law, because that again aligns with like this, why would they organize themselves into such distinct clans if not for some overarching like cultural reason.
Yeah, and that's interesting that like, and if I'm getting ahead of you, like,
No.
stop me then, but like,
Yeah.
so it's interesting that like, you're like, all right, they are defined by like having these very clearly defined like clan lines, and they are self-dividing in order to do so. And then like the thought is like, why? And then it's like, well, it's because of the gods they worship,
Yes.
rather than like they worship these gods because they already had this predilection towards
Exactly. Yeah.
really clear dividing lines. It's that
Yeah.
that I like that kind of like
Yeah.
chicken and egg situation.
They were just dwarves who worshipped a god, and then they were like, hey, we should organize ourselves to be more like our god. And I think that's better. The dwarves don't pop out the earth and they're like, I'm a smith dwarf. That's like,
I mean,
don't
my
know.
thought was just that like they would need to be highly organized if you're living under a mountain, like you're having to create more
Logistical
areas
problem.
for
Yeah.
yourselves.
Yeah.
You cannot mess up, right? Like you need to have a really well organized structure if you're going to be creating a city in a place that could potentially kill you.
yes. And part of that risk mitigation, right? You need everything to be, it's almost like a hive. You need everything to be like very carefully ordered, very on top of things. And then if there seems to be one clan who has more politically minded people, parents teaching their children like statecraft, and then 2 generations later, you have expert statesmen, right? Who are just like running circles around the people who are like, my parents taught me how to run a mine, right? But that creates a big conflict for the Citadel in of itself. Like that can turn things on its head, right? When one clan has power over the other. And so in my mind, like the idea of like disagreement at large is kind of frowned upon. There's very careful court systems to handle those kind of things. There's very careful laws and levies and certain things. And it's like the super bureaucratic system of like, if I'm going to disagree with you, I'm going to file paperwork to disagree with you. Otherwise I'll be like levied, or there will be some sort of fine on my part or for my clan, something like that. We are off in the weeds. But,
Yeah, we are.
but anyways, the world setting, I had this all political idea for Ashua, and then I had like, these dwarven laws, and like it's rigorous and bureaucratic. And then I looked back at the humans and I was like, you guys can be more mundane on the laws, but I'm going to be very careful about your like organization and the power structures here. The geographic layout. I don't know if you know this, but the campaign setting was originally made for a fracturing of the Ashuan kingdom and a kind of like warring states period, like a civil war to break out from disparate provincial states or factions within the kingdom. And Crow was going to be a large player in that campaign. That campaign didn't happen, and now we're playing Wildcliff. Crow was been moved away from such a role and is now...
It's very interesting that Ib was created with one campaign in mind,
Yes.
and then to start the podcast, you're like, here are a bunch of different campaigns that you can all choose from.
Yeah.
I'm gonna like, don't get me wrong, I'm gonna make all of the prep that I'm fit.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That is the most DM shit that I've ever seen in my life. That is perma DM brain of like, no, I'm not letting this go to waste. What are you talking about?
I like this guy too much. Yeah, he's going over here. But yeah, that happens when you create a world setting, a campaign setting, and you're like, oh, look at all these cool things. And then in my head, I'm like, I don't want to put this all in one thing because I think that would be bad. So I'm going to break a bunch of these ideas up into their own separate things. I'm going to ask the players, see what they want to play, because I would love to play any of these campaigns. I love this setting. It's great. I was fresh, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed.
Before being in one setting for 4 years.
It drains you. So, Ashuan nobility, it's a bit more amorphous than I originally conceived of it, to be truthful with you, and that comes at the cost, or that comes as a consequence of, if I was just to sit here and write everything in the way the political game goes, we've never run a political intrigue game. I would love to do that. I don't know if you do it in Ashua. We might do it somewhere else that's less defined. But when you have a player who's running the definitions for some stuff, you throw up some empty words, and then a player goes, this is what those words mean in the context of this game. And then you have to sit there and go, okay, so if that's how the nobility works, and Serenep, you've been watching people being executed on the Rego, I'm gonna have to rewrite some things on my end. These guys are the authority, the authoritarian kind of like divine reign of the monarchy, going to be really amped up a little bit. I think I'm gonna really try to think about them a bit more fearsome, more ruthless, which has led us to where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Ashuan states would not split under the good King Frederick.
They would not. it doesn't feel like a big deal because we don't focus on the politics, but that's a big deal truly, is that the Asheron Kingdom is much more stable than I originally wanted it to be. That comes from like this era of the game and the world should have a bit more stability, I think, because the focus isn't on the political intrigue of those things. The focus is on this school, which is a political chess piece, but I promised the players that there wouldn't be heavy politics in this game. It's not an intrigue game beyond like
Absolutely.
ousting a Bailey Blue kind of level.
And yeah, but it's very interesting to like know how your brain, like having done all of this prep on that kind of, and just knowing how your brain works, like
Yeah.
aside from prep, just like I know that you will be spending time just rotating these things in your head. And so like letting that inform the setting or letting that inform the next big moves, such as Lord Peters being not the good Grandpa Peters Serenep thought he was.
These are
Who
some of
could
the
have
things.
seen a kindly old man?
Master of Secrets himself?
What? No, he's Grandpa Peters.
These are the things. This is some of the stuff I reference when I say when your characters define the setting for you. Is like sometimes you get stuff where the Wallaby farm has 6 cows, and you're like, I don't think you know how a farm works, Ben. And sometimes you get stuff where Master of Secrets, Mystic Arcanum Master Old Man, Raisin himself, mind filled with arcane knowledge and probably almost a century worth of state secrets. Yeah, he's a good old dude. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with him. Let's not interrogate that, because, and I can justify that from like if I was thinking in Serenep's perspective, think about yourself as a kid and you view your parents as your parents and you're like, oh, my parents are great. And then it's not until like you get a bit older and you interrogate those thoughts, or like something might happen where you interrogate those thoughts. But then you think, let's think about like the strangers that you met as a kid, like your parents' friends. I bet you've never thought or interrogated those feelings really heavily because they haven't directly done anything that warrants you interrogating those thoughts about them, and because you haven't met them in hundreds or tens years, right?
I mean, and also, you would be a pretty bad Master of Secrets if you
gave off the
seemed
heinous
overtly
vibe.
Sinister.
Yeah.
Like no one is going to want to keep like someone who is kind of a Jafar around. Like you know, you're wrong. Jafar is a hottie, but like you don't want to have him.
True.
Like,
Not the kind of seneschal you want in your court.
yeah, you know, listen, like a vizier should be sinister, but not that sinister.
Yes, it should be like it should be subtext. But like Serenep being like, oh, he's a kindly old man. That did a lot of legwork for me in just letting him be trustworthy. Because sometimes the most difficult thing you can do is putting a character on in a scene or in the game and then being like, I rely so strongly on my players trusting this person, right? That falls apart quick. Your players are often, I find, suspicious of everyone.
Especially after you've put them through so much shit.
It's warranted. It's warranted. But like Lord Peters of his goodwill, spiriting Serenep away from the capital, should have been interrogated, I believe.
Yeah.
But we're, I think, putting the cart before the horse a bit.
You're right.
What I mean in that, Nathan, is the ruse at hand. If we go back and investigate the Alla Algrim message to Mira, she said, oh, they're moving the girl tonight, the traitor, the lady, right? I need you to take care of this. Don't let her know, because that might compromise, as Mira very quickly deduced, that might compromise the fact that the Ophelian state has very deep-seated spies, both in Wildcliff and in the Asheron Kingdom, right? That we picked up on this enough to give you this much heads-up notice for it's kind of like made public, right? We did our best to avert this, but this is the way of things. Please, as my hand which can be moved to avert this situation or gain something for me from this situation, I need you to move right now, Mira. And something that she very carefully says, which I think one person or a couple people have picked up on, was they will send someone who won't be easily tied back to the crown. This will not be someone directly involved coming in. And so the ruse that Peters is here with soldiers from Ashua, that's pretty heavy-handed. That's pretty directly tied back to the crown. We can investigate a couple of other things where Philip says, I spoke with Crow and I gave him a lot to think about, really. And then Philip showing up. He knows he had a plan this whole time. Serenep, come with me. And then this person who with the eye patch and the magic teleportation circle that goes, damn, easy as that. All right, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, good. Hey, if you're listening to this CNC and this is where you're picking up on this, sorry to do it to you like that, but God, I love when a ruse goes like that. Like the suspicion, but they still went with it. I love it. It feels so good. I was sitting pins and needles. I was like freaked out. Like this is gonna go bad. They're gonna see through this. They're not gonna trust it. Oh, they trusted it. We got Serenep out. We got the girl out, and now we get to see what comes next after that, which is quite fun.
I am so thrilled and so excited to see what happens next with this Serenep bit. And I'm also like very glad that we are getting like it coming to a head because I've personally been banging on the drum of like, what's going on with
Yes.
Hey, Ashwa, get it together.
Truly. How can a kingdom be
your
so
girl.
incompetent?
Yeah. Listen.
I do love the grapevine rumor, or like the thing of like, oh, the kingdom threatened to occupy the school, right? They threatened to send soldiers here and like blockade us or do something, occupy the school until we gave them the traitor, right? They twisted Crow's arm, right? Like, and now we're moving to get rid of Lord Peters from the council. That is a massive ramification that we can talk about of like, this kind of like multinational, international kind of like incident where Wildcliff is a product of multiple nations feeding in supplies, resources. Crow is a member of the Ashuan kingdom. He's a low-key, high-key, a noble of that new blood, obviously, but new money, but still very much in the noble class. And now he's going to be running this extra national school that the Ashuan kingdom won't really get any say in, presumably, unless things get smoothed over, unless a new member of some sort of the court, though I cannot think of no other better subject than the Master of Secrets. Maybe the Crown Prince could sit in on a meeting or two. That would be stupid. But it's like this, it's a very interesting thing for me with the setting where you're like, oh, everyone is welcome here. Everything is okay. Everyone kind of says, yeah, our people can go there and it's not a problem. And everyone else goes, yeah, cool, they can come. And it's kind of the convenient way to be anyone from anywhere. And that's still true, but there's going to be some like tensions revised of like, oh, there's noble students, Karina Lindman, Serenep Cinderman. What are the ramifications for them? What's the look there that noble students or children of nobles, the next generation of nobles, are kind of like participating in this external institute that's kind of like almost blacklisted by its reputation for harboring someone like Serenep for all this time, right?
Here's also like, this might be a weird question. Yeah. What is like the percentage of like the nobility who has like sent their children to Wildcliff?
Ashuan nobility, it's not super high.
I assumed so. I figured like it was like this handful.
It's a handful and a half probably. There's some like minor nobility, and by minor nobility I mean people that would be like
in that like higher merchant class.
Merchant class, higher merchant class. Someone like Bailey Blue would be like,
I was literally going to mention him.
A high merchant class for his parents, right? But not anywhere near like the capital, not a courtier, not like a direct advisor to the monarchy, right? Like Serenep or Karina's parents are, or were, in terms of Serenep's case.
God, love to sell my parents' names.
Love it. Let me tell you something that was so annoying to me is, and this isn't relevant to anything that happened on screen, Nathan, but I don't know if you as a DM or anyone listening can relate to this in terms of prepping. I had a brilliant idea. And I was like, oh, the ramifications of this, of the name change. It was like a pearl amidst a field of shit. And then it just slipped out of my brain. It slipped out completely. And I was like, oh, there would have been, what is it? What is the thing? Where was it? Where has it gone? So now we get the nameless traitors, a pale reflection of what ideas could have been. I think there was like some conception of like this spreading this is, again, it's like the Tenacious D song, like whatever tribute, where I can't remember exactly what the idea was, but I can give you my best approximations of it, of like this conception of they sold their names willingly in order to avoid possible persecutions. They cannot be persecuted by our laws, which require us to like name people directly, right? We cannot do anything magical to them which require, and this again ties back into like my conceptions of big magic. If I was to make my own system or write something else that was in this campaign setting, I wouldn't use the strict probably D&D magic stuff. The more we play with it, the more I kind of fall out of love with the magic system particularly. And I can point to like the most recent episode, Nathan, of this 226, where Serenepth and Mira are like, can we get wards or things to help stop this? And like Ben had a couple of ideas, and I was like, feign death, I guess. But there's like a couple of spells that do exactly what they would be looking for. But there's nothing that's like, oh, I ward my, like you can ward like whatever spell that sequester that Ben referenced, of like you can block yourself from divination magics or other mind shielding stuff. But there's no like, I want to be able to block enchantment magics from targeting myself by enchanting a ward. It's like those kind of things are like nebulous. It's like, oh, you have advantage on saving throws or something like that.
I mean, that magic does exist. It's just a prohibitively high level. So like, it's just way out. Like Mind Blake is an 8th level spell that keeps you from like being enchanted, right? Like,
exactly. And that's like so out of whack with a lot of like the conception of, and I guess this comes from like the disparity sometimes a player might have of like an expectation versus like the actual system at play. Those are little frictional moments. And like as a DM, I want to be able to be like, oh yeah, there would be tons of super cool ways to do this. I think it happened in the episode 225 when Winsler is like, is there any abjuration magic that affects golems? And I was like, oh yeah, there's like wards that give them vision and wards that do this. Those aren't real wards, but there are certain abjuration spells that are like true seeing, and we can like bend the arm a little bit, but it becomes like a little bit of a friction point. It's just a reflection I've been having. I don't know.
I think that's totally normal. I think something that has been helpful for me / like kind of freeing is conceptualizing the spells in D&D is like, here's just what is available to players.
Yes.
But magic itself is much wider.
Else. Yes. I also do this to save my own ass. I don't know if you do this, Nathan, or used to, because your scope has changed, but like years ago, hundreds of years ago, when I was a young man, I would be like, what spell exactly is affecting this? No, it's just magic. It's just doing stuff, right? The problem with that comes when the players have to interact with it, and the players are like, well, how exactly does this work? And I have to be like, oh, yes, Artisan a Pebble, that is not just demon magic from the outer planes. That is a modified mind jar. Yep, that's what it is. We're going to go with that.
Yeah.
Right? That's the kind of difficulty that arises.
Absolutely. I can understand that, because at the end of the day, like, while that is a conception for me of like, no, magic is wider than what is available in like the PHB or in any splat books, the truth is that those spells are made to work with those other spells.
Yes.
So, you know what? Maybe D&D as a system doesn't. It exists. I had, God.
Yeah.
I have an ancillary thing because
I would love to
we've
hear it.
run long.
Yes.
And like this doesn't tie back to any political stuff that we were talking about, which is rough.
That's fine. It is what it is.
Perfect. We got to see Bowen Blueblight.
Oh, you mean the Warlock, BB.
We got the BB Warlock. Yeah. I just wanted to like have a quick question to ask you, and I'm probably going to talk to Carla about this when we record the players section in a few days.
Yes.
Is Bowen's relationship like being pretty decent with their patron? Is this indicative of, and obviously like if you can't tell me, you can't tell me, but I like the idea of like, is this indicative of, they are the exception to the rule? Or is it, the list being kept is not necessarily like the whole of the various like warlock patrons? Like, it only has the ones who have like killed their warlocks. And the reason that I ask this is just because I think that the Patreon NPCs can pose an interesting dilemma of, my conception of the character that I am giving you to that I'm giving to Luke is at odds with the pre-established like world building.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so like having to reckon that is very interesting to me, and I wanted to hear your process on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thought comes in a couple of stages. We can go a different couple ways with it. And that was my original thought when Bowen Blue Blight came across my desk, where I was like, oh, a warlock, interesting. The conception of Keepsy, I don't think at the time that they were added into my compendium, I don't think my conception of like Keepsy and the list of warlocks, I add this idea for the chest and the chest pertaining to warlocks, but not that it was a character who watched over them, right? You can see in my notes if you're a patron, the exact moment that kind of change in my mind happens. And it happened on a post-it note. But we can go a couple of ways. One would be if the master list of warlocks is a comprehensive document that shows every single warlock who has ever stepped foot in Wildcliff. And it is so that Keepsy has some sort of omniscience about detecting warlocks, that whatever other magic's affecting them or stopping others from identifying, Keepsy can see through. If we take that approach, then we would just have to justify that Bowen became a warlock afterwards, and that there are no exceptions to the rule. If we conceive of it as only the bad ones get on the list, maybe it is such a case that exact same omniscience only extends so far as the bad vibes around someone, right? Like maybe a warlock with a patron who is particularly gearing them towards malevolence and drawing them off the path, which is what Keepsy's entire thing is, of like, be a hero, make good choices, steer yourself physically away from the wills of your patron and be your own person and don't succumb to that greater evil. Keepsy seems to have this like opinion that all patrons are inherently evil and are trying to steer their warlocks into doing evil things, right? And that might be just selection bias in this example, but in that conception that Keepsy can detect the evil warlocks, or the evil patrons, the magic oozing off of their warlocks, then yeah, it would be just the ones that are kind of like the ones that are leaving their patron or their warlocks into a trap, as it were. And
Keepsy. Oh, go ahead.
And that would mean Keepsy's like some warlocks are slipping through the cracks, you know?
Keepsy is just like the Glassdoor reviews for patrons.
Yes.
And like it's just sorted by like the lowest rated, like making sure you can see just how bad these patrons are. Like that's because like we also have to consider like, why was this list created, right?
Exactly.
Like what is its purpose? Is it just a record, or is it a warning to other warlocks? Not necessarily to like be afraid of like any patron, but like, hey, steer clear of these ones.
Yes.
Like, I don't know. Also, was Bowen's relationship with their patron, was that given to you, or was that something that you decided?
There is some information in the the entry that was given to me, but I've definitely played it to be and this is the answer to the question, is either it is a positive relationship, and I do think of it as kind of like at the current moment, a not very volatile relationship, right?
Probably mutually beneficial.
Exactly. Right now. And that's like the caveat on top of the patron kind of like clause. And maybe you as a player keep this in mind when you make a warlock. You can have a non-volatile patron, but in the totality of time, why are they giving you their power? What influence are they exuding upon you over the span of not a year, not a month, not a decade, but over your lifetime? Because being strong enough to give you that kind of power has enough time to wait for their plot, for like the seed to take root and fully envelop over your mind. The Progenitor's a bad example of this, as someone who gives historically very shitty deals, but we can see kind of like an example almost with Artis, where he gets like this 60 years, or give or take, of like insidious seeds being planted in his mind, to the point that I would probably pose Artis as a person, and this might be the alternate reality where they chose Dessa in that fateful episode 13 or 14, where Artis gives in to those temptations by the Progenitor finally, after being worn down like water over stone over decades of time, right? So Bowen's patron, Karad, as they said. I mean, they said that, and then Integrity was like,
how do you spell that?
Yeah, and then they were like, oh, that's totally a first year. Because this is and the reason, to give the justification of that, Integrity literally said, we have a shared history. And so, as Bowen, I interpreted that as, oh, you're a warlock, you have the same patron as me. We work for the same person. So they very quickly out themselves, and then Integrity's like, who is that? And then Bowen's like, oh, you don't? Oh, that's totally a first year. Don't read into it. I'm leaving now, right? And so like this conception of it's non-volatile right now. Who knows what Kirad will influence Bowen towards in the totality of time? They are, as given to me, a more of a elder force of nature, more than like a being with a direct agenda, such as like the Progenitor or Our Lady of the Deep. And so combined with a high elf's lifespan, not in any rush, I would say.
Absolutely.
And that directly influences the character. I will say, during the ousting of Bailey Blue, the symposium of candidates, the homunculus was restrained by being levitated to the ceiling against its will. It wasn't going to go fuck with Bailey. It was going to go sit and plant itself on Bowen's shoulder. There was 2 BB warlocks at the same time. It was joyous moments for me. And I was like, one of these is going to go under the radar, and it's definitely going to be Bowen.
Oh,
so that's the
God
way the
bless.
cookie crumbles. I was totally prepared for Integrity to be much more overt and be like, write your name here. Let me get all the information. Like the DMV agent of warlocks, right?
So off-putting just to
So
picture like
off-putting.
being in class and then being like, hey, could I get your social security number real quick? It's just because we have similar majors.
Yeah.
So
but like, I have to imagine Keepsy wasn't very good at it the first time. Integrity's just going through all the learning all the difficulties of a new position, you know?
it's true. And I'm so excited for her to find new difficulties as well. But Luke, I just wanted to say thank you so much for so many insightful answers,
glad.
especially regarding the Ashwin political system and the Dwarven
So we went
political
off into
system.
dwarves. I took any chance I could get to talk about dwarves. But I'm going to take a chance again. You might have noticed in the first 60 episodes of the show, the words dwarven schism come up constantly. Never once did we go into the depths of what that means. It was baked into the setting. I was so excited. It ignored forever. I'll take any chance to talk about dwarves. I love them.
Well, listeners, now you know what to write in for the next mailbag episode. If
Ask
you
me
want
about
Luke
my
to read your
dwarf.
question, just be like, so what's your favorite dwarven surname?
Yeah.
You know, what's your favorite kind of naming convention for the dwarves?
My favorite thing for the dwarves is that Dessa Trubeard has a Toldir dwarf accent, but she has a Derheim dwarf surname.
What the fuck?
And that would have been interrogated in the alternate universe where Dessa was their mentor. I'm so sorry for constantly interrupting you. I'm so chatty today. My apologies.
No worries. Well, Luke, I'm gonna give you another outlet to express
Chat.
yourself, to like get this energy out. Why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners how they can support us at Patreon at
my
Trials
God.
and Trebuchets, you know. Or like if they want to support us financially in other ways, go to trebmerch.com.
Like trebmerch.com. Yeah. Or if you don't have money, as most of us do, you can do something free, such as going and leaving a review for the show, which genuinely helps super. We're gonna make a promise. Tonight, I'm gonna go and review a show I listen to, and tonight, you listeners should review our show. Please give us like five stars if you really want to.
You know
or
what?
just tell a friend.
Yeah, I'm gonna finally review the Trials and Trebuchets. Just kidding. I reviewed it years ago. If you scroll back far enough, you can find it.
Yeah.
But
there's also a Discord, which has a link down in the description, where you can go and chat about all this stuff. Or you can go on there and ask me about dwarves on the server, and I'll probably answer you, because I don't think it's going to come up in this campaign.
no, you're the only one who cares
It
about
would be
dwarves.
fucking wild. It would be wild. We learned that all the Shiorans were actually dwarves.
Oh my god. Well, Luke, thank you. I'm so excited to see you pull off more ruses and give you the roses as we all rises up. This sucks. Ben, please cut that. That's bad. That's genuinely bad.
I like what you were going for.
No.
See ya.
Bye. As the dwarves like to say, we're ending the recording now.